I'm Marcus Smith, and this is Constant Wonder. Every morning, we awake to a world marvelously alive. Where do we encounter awe and wonder in this world? In animals and plants, in deserts, on mountains, in forests, ocean and sky, in history, art and science, in human striving and human kindness. Join us as we quest for the awe and wonder of knowing we are part of something infinitely larger than ourselves.
You're focused in a way that you're not in most of modern life, on the sun coming up and the sun going down, on what the wind's doing, on whether this thing in front of you will live or die and whether you can make a difference to it.
James Rebanks, describing how it felt when he found himself on a tiny wind-swept island off the coast of Norway, working there side by side with a 71-year-old woman who was born and raised in the region, a woman named Anna. James was helping Anna build nests for eider ducks. That's a species of waterfowl rapidly disappearing in that part of the world. This episode follows his adventure out to this isolated spot to an island he calls Fier, some 900 miles from his home in northern England's Lake District. Fier is only the size of a soccer field, and it's one of 6,000 such islands belonging to Norway on the edge of the Arctic Circle. This woman, Anna, her name is actually a pseudonym, was carrying on a centuries-old family tradition of gathering eider duck down from the nests these animals abandon once they've served their purpose. Working alongside of Anna in 2019, James Rebanks had a twofold purpose. First, he wanted to document her story, and second, he had a sense that he needed to refine something about himself that he felt he had lost. Over the course of a 5-year effort, Anna had single-handedly coaxed a colony of wild eider ducks into re-establishing their nesting grounds on another tiny island of the archipelago, her own family's island. She managed to attract their return decades after eider ducks had last been seen nesting there. And for her efforts, she had earned great respect in her community as a duck woman, entrusted with the care of ducks nesting on other islands. Compared to her success in supporting this endangered species, what could James, a writer and farmer, say for himself? What had he really accomplished in his 4.5 decades on this planet?
I missed that certainty of being with people that just believed that what they were doing mattered and was important. I'd grown up with a grandfather like that, even a dad like that, really. They believed 100% in what they did. They believed in the goodness of it, the purpose of it, the significance of it. And I think almost the more modern our lives become, the more modern our work becomes, the more ambiguous that becomes, right? Like, what did I do today? Am I doing anything useful? Like, I wrote a thing. Does that help, really?
James found himself hoping that this singular woman, Anna, could restore for him a sense of purpose when working the land he grew up on, and a greater sense of satisfaction in his efforts. That sense had gone missing amid the pressures of family and career, and through the passing of several of his mentors in life. He also wanted to bear witness of the work that Anna had done for decades without pay or glory. There was urgency in her work. The eider duck nests on that family island of hers had numbered 1,500 in the mid-1800s, yet there were only rare sightings of the ducks by the late 1980s. That's when Anna decided to try to bring them back. Two stories converge here, Anna bringing back the ducks, and James finding his own way again. James Rebanks' latest book is The Place of Tides. James first met Anna in 2012 as an advisor to UNESCO. This is a guy who has had several careers. He was traveling by fishing boat to the island where she was working, Fier, which locals referred to as the Place of Tides, and he was investigating the impacts of global tourism on such remote locales. Now, just to be clear about the time frame, this was 7 years before he'd actually get to work with Anna. Fier is a few miles off the main island of the Vega archipelago, but don't go looking for it on your map, because just like our heroine's name Anna, Fier is not the real name of this enchanted place.
These are the gentlest, shyest, most private people I've ever met. And I don't want to be that writer that ruins everything. So I did a little bit of disguising of names in the book.
In spite of her unassuming and private demeanor, it's no overstatement to say that James was completely mesmerized by Anna back when he first learned about her in 2012.
They took me way, way out, really to the edge of the world, the edge of Europe, to a tiny little island where there's a little white wooden house sitting on the island and some little red barns. But what was really, really strange and quite eerie was there was a woman standing on the rocks when we got there. And she was, I wouldn't say this to her face because she would kick my butt, but she was a little bit witch-like. There was something sort of powerful about her, even though she was tiny. I was spellbound by her. And I realized that the people on the boat were a little bit scared of her. This was her space. You know, sometimes you see those tribes from the Amazon where somebody stands on the edge of the forest and they sort of shake a spear and you think, oh, wow, they're not really of our world. They have another world somewhere out in that forest. Well, it was a little bit like that.
Standing about 5 feet tall, her hair all tousled by the coastal wind, a woman in her mid-60s at that time, Anna seemed to watch them sternly as they approached the flat, rocky island. And once the boat made land there, she inspected her visitors, and then, to their relief, proceeded to give them an explanation of her voluntary work, her dedication to helping these eider ducks.
They have this wonderful tradition in Norway whereby they make stone or wooden nests for the eider ducks. They look after them, they protect them from predators. They're wild ducks, right? Why can't they just find their own places to nest? It turns out that their ecological niche, the place where they nested in the past, was in these huge swirling seabird colonies with millions, tens of millions of birds. And the eider ducks would go there and be protected by the general chaos. So if you're an otter or these days a mink, so there's North American mink there now, but if you're an otter or a predator or a crow or a skua, you've got to contend with millions of swirling seabirds pulling your tail feathers out and pecking at you and mobbing you. So that's where they would have gone. But those places are vanishing in front of our eyes right now. So about an hour north of this island, there's a huge seabird colony that until the turn of the last century, so in the year 2000, had between 15 and 20 million birds and is now silent.
This story of a shifting baseline for the eider duck population also involves vagaries of human and animal cohabitation. For example, in their day, Anna's great-grandparents witnessed explosive growth in their Eiderdown business because the duck populations followed the booming fishing industry in the archipelago. Their numbers swelled because they were feeding off scraps and byproducts from the processing of the fish. But as the fisheries came on hard times with emptier seas, the duck population quite naturally followed suit. It plummeted.
We started to screw things up quite a long time ago, 150, 200 years ago. So this little island that had 1,500 nests in the mid-19th century is down to about 900 by 1900. But then the next real disaster is the Second World War. So the Germans occupy Norway. The coast becomes really important to the Germans defending against the Royal Navy. This archipelago with its 6,000 islands is a perfect rat run in and out for getting people in and out of Norway. So they recruit lots of the fishermen and fisherwomen from this place, including Anna's relatives and everybody else's relatives that I met. And they do incredibly brave things, smuggling airmen out and arms in and explosives in and things. And the Germans find it really hard to police. You can't tell what's under the water. There's hidden rocks everywhere. The locals know how to get in and out, and you don't. But the Germans saw the ducks who were tame around the people in these islands and decided the ducks are just food. So they start slaughtering these tame wild ducks when they come ashore in the spring in really large numbers, absolutely devastated. And then after the war, with far fewer ducks, with the fish stocks in decline, it's becoming much, much harder to make a living.
Still, the total volume of eiderdown collected around the world in any given year comes to only about one small truckload. That's the equivalent of the down needed to make about 3,000 duvets. So we're talking about a hard-won, exceedingly rare commodity. If you've never seen what an eider duck looks like,
the males are quite flashy. They're sort of white and proud, and they've got these black bars on the wings, and they've got a sort of very elegant green sash on the back of the neck. The females are quite brown and dowdy and unspectacular. They're sort of big wedged heads. And when I was with the women, they were laughing. They were saying, this is just like humans. The ducks, the male ducks are flashy and pompous and don't do very much. And the female ducks get the drab clothes, but have to do the real hard work.
It takes immense dedication and patience for people like Anna to do what they do.
They build hundreds of these nests, literally hundreds. And then the wild ducks come ashore, they trust the women or the men, and they make their nests. And then when they leave at the end of spring, they leave a handful of little dirty feathers in the seaweed nest. And that is what becomes eiderdown when it's been cleaned by these amazing women. And that was her family's thing for many, many centuries.
It's why Anna was there in 2012 when James Rebank arrived on that tiny island in his role as a UNESCO advisor.
I instantly fell in love with this woman without really knowing why. And I don't mean romantically. I was just absolutely drawn to her. She was mesmeric. My first impression was one of confusion. Who is this person in this incredibly inhospitable place? Why would somebody go to this place? What's the story here? All of those things were flooding around my mind. And also, the other people on the boat, the people that had taken me there, were intimidated by her. And I thought, why are they intimidated by this tiny little woman? There's something strange going on here, and I couldn't pin it down.
How did you communicate with her? What language did you default to?
When we got ashore and we started talking, there was somebody there to translate on that first visit. And this is where the magic really began, my dialect, in the north of England, my dialect is full of Norse words. I could understand about a third of what she said. She wasn't somebody who used a great many words anyway. A lot of it was sign language or you come with me, and it was things she showed me. She was curious about me, and I was curious about her, and we were looking at each other in that way that sometimes maybe happens half a dozen times in your life where you think, this person's magic, and I think they might like me too. The other part of that magic of that first scene was when I shook her hand, all of the hair stood up on the back of my neck because she had, and maybe some people listening will recognize this, my grandmother was the only other person who had hands like that I can remember. These incredibly bony, sinewy, working women's hands from the past that very few people have now. They were almost animal-like, almost claw-like, these hands. I was from these really old-fashioned farming people myself in the north of England. And I think I was missing them. They'd all vanished out of my life over the preceding 10 years. They'd got old, they died. So we were looking at each other in this slightly crowded scene where other people were with us. She gestured for me. She said, come with me. I want to show you what I do. So she took me to this little wooden barn, did a funny little knock on the door. Then she very quietly opens this wooden door. And there are wild eider ducks sitting on nests, which she has made with her own hands from dried seaweed, in the sort of corridor of the barn. And she reached down to them, and I'm thinking, wow, these are wild birds. Why would they let you do that? And if I moved more than an inch, they looked sort of nervous. But she was able to touch them. She was able to lift up their wing. This is a wild bird, and she was able to pick the duckling from under the wing and show me the duckling. I think in my whole life, I've never seen anybody who looked so, well, I'm probably using the word magical too much. The bird was in awe of her. I was in awe of her. And also she was so in love with these birds. It was clear that this was the most important and most beautiful thing in her life, that she cared for these wild birds. And she somehow sensed that I would like that. Maybe because it was just chemistry between two people who were destined to like each other, or maybe it was that I told her that I was a farmer, and I told her that we had some of the same problems she had.
Working the family farm back in England consumed about 80% of his daylight hours. His life of writing, well, that part of his life came down to burning the midnight oil.
I was telling her that the ravens on my farm sometimes killed the young lambs. So I think she thought, oh, this is someone like me. This is someone that understands wild things. She was having to scare the ravens away because they'd learned very cleverly how to pull the seaweed nests out of these stone shelters and break the eggs and steal them. So I got this 30-minute period with her on my own where she showed me her world, or a very quick glimpse of it. And then it was all over really quickly. We got back on a boat. We went back to the big island. I flew home. My life carried on, a sort of strange juggle of being a farmer and doing an off-farm job. And I got a chance to write a couple of books, and you and I have spoken about those before. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I couldn't wait to find a way to go back. But in real life, nobody ever lets you go back, right? There's no excuse to go back to an island in Norway.
Yeah.
Until I had some success writing. And my editor said, "What's the story that you want to write?" And I said, "I've been waiting a long time for you to ask me that. I know exactly which story I want to write. I have to go back to this woman on the island."
I don't know how far you're willing to go to characterize that experience. You've said magic.
Yeah.
Something happened there that seems like it was pretty big. I'm wondering if you can characterize that as, I mean, on our show, sometimes people like the word spiritual. Some people don't.
Yeah.
But apart from magic, that was a real event that was powerful, and I think you have more to say about it.
Yeah, I think that's true. So I'm one of those people a little suspicious of the word spiritual. I don't know why, I just am. But I think there was probably something spiritual there. And like lots of people listening to this program, right, we learn how to play the game, don't we? We learn how to do modern jobs. We learn how to live a modern life. We learn how to pay the bills at the end of the month and how to speak to everybody and how to navigate the world that we've ended up in. And I learned how to do that from a pretty old-fashioned starting place as a farm kid in this remote place where I live. I learned how to be quite good at that. And I had a quite good job and I got paid quite good money. And I sort of changed myself to be what the world needed me to be. I had kids, I had a mortgage, I had to be that guy that just did the stuff. Sometimes I didn't want to, but I did it. And I didn't realize until I met Anna that I'd kind of traded something away, like an older version of who I was. I'd come from people that they didn't really read books. They spent their whole time thinking about wild things and soil and fields and what the weather was doing today and what you could learn from the birds and what the animals were doing in the field. That was what my dad and my grandfather were. And over the sort of 20 years, maybe from 20 to 40 years old, I'd got away from that. I still thought that was me somewhere deep inside, but I'd got away from it. And I think it was when I met this woman on the island, I went, "Oh, you've held firm to this. You're like the people I left a long time ago and I feel homesick for." And I think you're right to push me because I feel emotional now just thinking about it. I feel it was like finding my people again. Does that make sense? I felt at home with her in a way that I don't always feel at home in the modern world. I can do the modern world. I sometimes feel confused by it and anxious and I'm probably somebody that overthinks and worries about things. And yet when I was with her, it was just like going back to being a kid with my grandma. I was like, "Oh, I know this world. I know how this works.
Yeah.
I know how you work."
Yeah. James felt a natural sympathy with the whole vibe of Anna's world, with the way she saw things. But he wanted to know more about this world than mere generalities. Why did these ducks matter so much to her? And could someone like Anna preserve this trade in a modernized world? Maybe she saw it as a calling, and sometimes a calling means you have to go against the flow. And then there was the basic question of any connections she might have in human society. Did she have a family somewhere? After all, she struck James as just a little witch-like, to use his word. These and other questions wouldn't quite leave him alone for 7 years.
I'd written to her through a friend at the museum who I'd been with the first time, and I got a message back very quickly, and the message said, "Yes, I remember you. You're the only Englishman that ever came to my island," so that narrows it down. She said, "Yeah, my health's failing." She was struggling with her blood pressure. So she said, "This is going to be my last season as a duck woman on the outermost island, the little island. If you're coming, you have to come now, and you have to fetch some work clothes." My middle-aged fantasy of escaping to go back and find this strange witch-like woman in about 2 days became very real. I have to get on a flight at the end of the week because I have a life at home where I'm juggling things. I'm looking after my wife and 4 kids as best I can, or she's looking after me, might be more truthful.
There was the question, too, of whether James would be meeting up with the same person, the same Anna he thought he had gotten to know a little. After all, a lot of time had intervened. Would she still be the mesmerizing figure of his memory? Well, whatever the case, he was settled on going, so things would just have to be whatever they would be for the full 10 weeks of his visit. And off he went.
So when I went back, we landed with a bump because it was a different version of her I met. I met her back on the main island where she lives for some of the year, and I met her in a much more domestic setting. And I very quickly discovered that she'd had 2 lives in parallel. She'd had a very ordinary life, like many of us. My original impression was she's outside of history. She's outside of the contemporary world. She's somehow out there. And when I went back, it was way more complicated than that. She'd had a very ordinary life. She'd been a cook in an old people's home. She'd been a carer for her elderly relatives and her father. She'd been a mom. Some of the people in her community had gone off to the big city, or they'd gone off to get educated and done sort of modern careers. She'd been one of the people that was sort of a little bit left behind, a little bit forgotten about on these small islands, doing quite modest things that nobody ever particularly celebrated. She'd been married a couple of times, had 4 wonderful kids who I quickly got to know and like and love very much.
But as James had hoped, and he was not disappointed in this, a big part of her heart was still very much married to the old ways, tied to those wild islands, and to her family heritage shaped by the sea.
All of the walls of her house are covered in black and white photographs of these island people. Basically, her people had gone out to the edge at least 1,000 years ago. Originally, they'd been very, very poor. So they basically worked for some Viking lord or Viking king. He'd sent them out there to gather eiderdown or to do the fishing. And some of those people had come on boats to my part of the north of England and brought my dialect with them. So there's a very strong kinship and sort of cultural link between what I am and what I came from and what they are. But her family had this amazing story whereby they'd effectively gone from being like indentured servants or almost slaves, but over time they'd made enough money by being brilliant at looking after the wild birds that they bought their own island. Eventually they called them the Eiderdown kings and queens. And she told me this amazing story about her great-grandfather who'd, in the mid-19th century, they passed a law which said that some of these people could become free and they could buy their own islands if you could come up with the cash. And they didn't think anyone could come up with the cash. So her great-grandfather turns up for a meeting with the aristocrat who owns this land, or the merchant, and amazes everybody by putting the money on the table and buying this island outright with cash. And he basically spent the preceding 25, 30 years gathering feathers, gathering seabird eggs, selling them, trading this stuff as far away as Trondheim or even further afield, until he could afford to do the thing that everyone said was impossible, which is to buy his little place on the edge. There had been a kind of golden age for Eiderdown in the mid-19th century. They persuaded so many ducks to come, and the seas were still healthy enough, and there was still enough fishing going on. These people, they'd been brilliant stewards of their own ecosystem, that it's full of life, and it's full of ducks. And ducks equal feathers, and feathers equals money to them. So in the best season that they had, they'd made so much money they bought a 14-foot sailing boat. And Anna's grandparents had to go to the big island, Vega, to go to church each Sunday. So Norway was a deeply religious country. They have to go to church by law every Sunday, even though it's across the sea and it's kind of dangerous. And when they get there, they have to sit in the cheap seats. They're the lowest status people. The outer island people are considered poor and a little bit dirty and a little bit backwards. So they make them sit in the cheap seats. But in the latter part of the 19th century, Anna's relatives were sitting at the back of the church in the cheap seats, but wearing really nice clothes and with gold watches. Her grandfather's pulling this gold watch out to flex his wealth. The great-grandmother is furious that they have no status on this big island or in the church, but they have more money than lots of people there. And Anna, who I got to know 100 years later from that, was sort of low status again, but in her heart and her head, she's not low status. All of her family stories are about a grandfather being relatively wealthy, and they're having nice boats, and they built this little paradise.
I've never slept under an Eiderdown comforter, but James has, and hearing him talk about the experience makes me wish I could. And it persuades me, actually, that with hard work and determination, people like Anna's ancestors really were able to get wealthy off this exotic, precious material.
So for the first time in my life, and possibly the last time, I was sleeping under an eiderdown duvet in Anna's house. And it is exceptional. I mean, they just are so light, so airy, so warm. It is one of the world's amazing great products. It's so light, it's so fluffy. The second half of the year, the bit that I didn't share in as much, is that they hand clean this eiderdown, which is all sorts of clever little skills they have to make it perfect.
Cleaning the gathered eiderdown is a painstaking process, separating out tiny bits of seaweed, grass, eggshell, and other impurities, and all by hand. Up to 70% of the original weight of the uncleaned down may consist of this unwanted debris.
If you're ever lucky enough to have a Norwegian eiderdown that's been hand cleaned, you not only are the beneficiary of hundreds of years of symbiosis between these women and the ducks, and a season of nest making with all that physical labour, and 6 months of hand cleaning, what you're sleeping beneath is a staggering endeavour, really. I did ask at one point, I said, how do I buy one of these things? And they said, firstly, you can't afford one because they're now so rare, they're so expensive. They either become family heirlooms or they become sold to somebody very expensively. Maybe if you're a sheik or something in the Middle East, you can get hold of one of these. Anna's family told me a lovely story, which is her mother was not from this tradition. Her mother was from a farming family on the bigger island, or a farming fisherman family. And she'd been told her whole life that the Eiderdown people were these sort of slightly stupid outer islanders, a little bit dirty, a little bit poorer. And when she went to stay there for the first time, they put her under an Eiderdown duvet for the first night to sleep under. And she'd woken up smiling, having had the best night's sleep she'd ever had, and realised how special an Eiderdown duvet was. And that probably everything else she'd ever been told about the outer island people was perhaps not fully accurate either.
And so to call these people Eiderdown kings and queens, well, that was hardly a stretch. James Rebanks could relate to this story on a very personal level.
My own grandfather was a little bit like that as a hill farmer. He thought he was important. And I remember seeing my grandfather talking to an English aristocrat once because he loved horses. And I remember thinking, my granddad's not being deferential to this guy at all. He's talking to him like this guy's, at best, his equal. So there's a very rough kind of northern egalitarianism at work there. There was something quite proud about Anna. She was quietly proud. There's enough backbone there to say, no, I'll live how I want to live, thank you.
His initiation into this traditional world left James in awe at the trusting relationship that must have existed between Anna's ancestors and the ducks themselves. It must have been a cyclical drama playing out over multiple generations of both humans and animals, and all on just a few acres of rocky terrain surrounded by the sea.
At one point on this little island that the family bought, they had over 1,500 nests happening every year. Now, in the wild, there'd probably be about 5. But every little part of this island is covered in these handcrafted stone and wooden nests. And they've persuaded generation after generation after generation of wild ducks to come in from the sea and trust them, and then to come back the next generation because they trust that place. So you're building this natural abundance of the place in an incredible way.
Persuading a wild duck to come nest and brood in a shelter that you've made for it? Well, before we even get to that, we ought to visualize what these human-made nests look like in the first place.
This was the utter craftsmanship and artistry of her work. When we first got to the island at the start of the season, we had to fork seaweed onto the rocks and then turn it every day, like you would turn hay with a 2-pronged hay fork. And then when we'd made, maybe a ton of dried seaweed, we had to lead it all over the island to where the nests were, and then craft this really crunchy, brittle sort of reefs of seaweed, a bit like a Christmas wreath. You know, like you take sort of sticky brown, sort of thorny or sticky branches and you forced them with gloves on into a circle. Well, that's what the seaweed nests were like. And then you would fill the center of them with crunched, broken, the little bubbles on black seaweed.
Yeah, on the kelp.
Yeah. So we would sort of break those bits off when it was super brittle and dry, and you'd have a bucket full of that stuff to put in the middle. It looked so easy. It looked so crude and simple that I would start to make these nests, and Anna would just look at me and go, no, no. That's nowhere near good enough. And she would prod it and push it and nudge it and puts things a little bit differently. A bit like you're watching like a master chef or something who puts things on a plate properly instead of how you do it. And then she would look at me as if to say, come on, you can do better than that. And for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, I tried to do better. And then eventually I persuaded her I could do it. And she began to trust me. And
so you also constructed either wooden shelters or stones, something to surround it to conceal the mother duck?
Yeah, so the crudest shelters, maybe the ones that the Viking women would have done back in the day, were like a dry stone wall mound, and then some bits of timber across the top, and then basically a giant fork full of seaweed, dry seaweed, over the top, like a wig almost, and a little 11 centimeter high hole that the duck can crawl through into the middle where it gets into the nest, shuffles itself down, decides it feels safe, and lays its eggs. So the simplest ones were those, sort of crudest ones were these little stone shelters, but they also made a wooden box version. And then they had sort of chicken huts or barns or cow sheds, anything that offered shelter and safety. Even upturned boats. They would get these old boats from maybe the 70s or the 80s that some old fishermen's left there, turn them upside down, put a wooden door in, and then you'd crawl in, and inside it would be like a little cathedral with all the struts of the boat above you. Lots of the nests weren't used. It was down to the whim of the ducks, really. So in one of the huts that we were making nests in, an otter had wintered in there, and there was the smell of otter. And we made the nest there, but Anna said that no sensible duck will nest here. They'll smell the otters, and sure enough, they didn't. It really was about thinking like a duck and making the life of the duck easier so that it could do its thing.
James Rebanks, author of The Place of Tides. He'll take us next into the circumstances that led Anna to revive her old family livelihood and tradition of gathering eiderdown. I'm Marcus Smith, and this is Constant Wonder from BYU Radio. I'd like to take just a brief moment here to introduce you to another gem from the BYU Radio family of podcasts. It's called In Good Faith. You can immerse yourself in a soul-nourishing experience of spiritual exploration. Stephen Cat Perry is the host, and he features people of diverse religions and spiritualities. He always interviews them with an aim to come upon a genuine understanding of the guest's relationship with the divine. Maybe you're wanting to strengthen your own relationship, or maybe you just feel a hunger for thoughtful conversation that touches on faith and belief. Whatever your need, it's truly rare these days in the media landscape to find conversations that unfailingly nourish and uplift your soul. In Good Faith does that every time, and you'll find it wherever you get your podcasts. We now return to Constant Wonder.
Anna's story was that her grandmother had been the last of the true duck women, and then modernization had happened. The Norwegian government had been the best modernizing government in the world. It had said, let's bring these poor people in from the extremities, let's put them in bigger towns, let's build colleges, let's build roads, let's send people to universities, let's build oil rigs, let's do modernization and do it brilliantly by centralizing. And the losers of that were people like Anna's family with very rooted peripheral cultural activities. Anna, she was the little girl who sat at her grandmother's knee and heard these stories about what had been there in the past. And Anna did something remarkable. Anna had led quite a domestic, sort of ordinary working housewife type life until she was in her late 40s. And then it seemed to me that there'd been a kind of rebellion where one day she just thought, you know what, I haven't done the thing I really love. Like, the thing I love is on that island. It's the thing my dad did. It's the thing my grandmother did. And it's a small thing, but it was a big thing to her. It's not even just the heroism of keeping an old thing going. it's a kind of new layer of heroism where you go back to the place and you try to rebuild it. And she did staggering things. She spent 15 years slowly but surely persuading a handful of wild eider ducks to come in from the open sea and to nest again on her island. And she did this by doing mad things like sailing out in a rowing boat to the tiny little islands where they still nested out on the water, building stone nests around them a little bit more each day until they trusted her so that they would become semi-tame wild ducks, and she could persuade them over the following years to go back to her family's island. And she was doing this unpaid. There's a level of stubbornness and sort of silent, dogmatic heroism about what this woman did.
It was 5 years before any ducks would come at Anna's bidding to nest on the family island again. And it took 15 years for her to achieve a total of 60 nests, which together would yield enough feathers for just one duvet. Putting in this kind of time required a great financial sacrifice. Even a single season spent on a remote island means many weeks away from the big island.
So she works in an old people's home. She has to go to the boss and say, I'd like to take 3 months unpaid leave off from the kitchen. And the boss had been entirely unsympathetic. And some of those old tensions and battles on that island between the higher status people on the big island and the outer island people had come out. Like, why do you want to go and do that thing? Like, surely you little island people learned your lesson a while ago, right? That's what poor people do. You don't do that anymore. But she'd held firm, and she'd caught a little bit of luck. Originally, she went out there and worked for nothing for several years, using her leave from work, and nobody cared and nobody saw it for years. So she didn't do it perfectly, but she did enough for everyone to see it and to inspire lots of other people to do similar things around her. Eventually, the conservationists and the bird scientists began to realize that what she was doing was exceptional and was helping the birds, and they could learn from it. And they began to support it in a small way. So there was a small stipend for going out to the islands. And now the Norwegian government, because that tradition is now recognized as a World Heritage tradition by UNESCO, there's now a degree of support for the remaining people that do that work to cover their costs and enable them to go and do it.
Were her children grown by the time she headed out to the small island?
Yeah, she has 4 grown-up kids, and I don't talk about them too much to respect their privacy, but they're wonderful people. A little bit like me, they've got one foot in the modern world doing the things they have to do, the jobs and the lives that they have to lead. And then in their heart of hearts, I think there's a big amount of island and duck love. and they all, and quite rightly, they all adore and respect and venerate their mother. They realise just how remarkable she was.
Rubbing shoulders with Anna, working with her side by side, well, that brought him something remarkable as well. Over time, James began to find once again the thing he sensed had gone missing from his life in spite of, well, actually, maybe because of his apparent success in the world.
So it is very strange work. What I realized when I got there is my whole life is kind of manic. And maybe that's my personality type too. But I'm busy. I'm I'm sure you are. Lots of people listening to this will be like, you're doing your job and then you're taking kids somewhere and then I'm looking after the farm. And there's never like quiet, long, quiet, slightly boring times. That I just haven't had that since I was a kid. And when I got to this island, there was 2 or 3 hours of nest building every day. So we try and build like 20, 30, 40 nests a day. So Anna's friend Ingrid came out as well. There were 3 of us. But because these were much older ladies than I was, there were quite long periods every day where they would rest or where it was just became clear to me that the normal thing you did on this little island was to slow down. Just slow the heck down. Stop talking. Stop looking at your phone. And what I realized was that Anna was one of the best naturalists, one of the best seers of the world I've ever met. And that was because she wasn't thinking about 15 different things. She was really paying attention to the tide and the seabirds and what the seagulls were doing and whether the ducks were coming ashore. And there was a period of about 3 weeks where we were waiting for the ducks to come and we were effectively policing the silence of a very quiet place. I found that way more difficult than I thought I would because silence throws you back in on yourself. It makes you ask all those difficult questions. Have I been a good person? Have I used my life well? Maybe these are middle-aged questions as well. I'm 50 years old now. But it gave me the most time to think and stop and consider things that I've had for many, many, many years. And I felt quite a lot of homesickness, and I felt some guilt for things, not terrible things I'd done, but just life choices I'd made. Like I'd been very driven and very striving, and a little hard. And some of that came back to me, and I thought, oh, I've probably been a bit of a jerk at times. I've probably been a little hard to people around me at times, particularly my wife. So it became a really interesting period for me where, and maybe that's what my wife thought I needed, time just to take your foot off the accelerator, stop the car even, and just having hours every day to think. It just made me just slow the heck down and process some of that stuff. And that wasn't all fun.
Somebody James had left back at home in England for his 10 weeks in Norway may have known that this was how things would go for him. Here he is, reflecting back on how he convinced his wife, on short notice, to let him go pursue this learning experience.
I had to say to my wife, I don't do things like this, but could I do this once in my life? Could I scratch this itch? Can I go back to this place? Can you manage the farm? Can you manage the kids if I leave you? Like, this feels wildly irresponsible. And my wife not only said, yes, I could do that, she said, I think you need to do that. You've been striving and racing and working. I think she sensed I was beginning to burn out. So she said, I think you need to do this. When you come back, you can pay me back. You can wash the dishes more and look after the kids more.
Is there any aspect of this where she, with a little bit of secret glee, was banishing you to a remote and desolate place?
This may make people laugh, but I was trained as a historian. And one of the things we were taught about was anthropology. And anthropologists trying as best they can, it's impossible, but trying to leave their values at the door and trying to genuinely listen to people in other cultures or tribes. So I thought, okay, I'll go to this island and I'll try not to be me. I'll be as small as I could be in this. I'll just listen and I'll watch and I'll soak up everything she does and I'll try and understand the world through her eyes. Now, I know technically this is a little bit impossible, but I would try to the best of my ability. And when I told Anna this, she said, oh, so you're kind of with me. You're an honorary woman. And I said, I would love it if you accept me as an honorary woman. And she said, okay, in that case, I'm going to tell you everything that's wrong with men because you can't be offended if you're an honorary woman. And it took her about 3 weeks. So when I told my wife that I was part of a feminist lecture that had lasted 3 weeks, my wife thought, yeah, that was pretty cool and I probably deserved it and needed it. A little bit like going cold turkey if you're a drug addict or something, isn't it? There's a sort of sweaty, horrible bit where it comes out of you. And I had a few days like that on the island where I was just struggling, really. And then you come out the other side of it and you think, oh, actually, really lucky. And Anna taught me this as well. When I was with her, she was like, you've got 4 beautiful kids, you've got an amazing home, you live on a farm, you've written some books, your wife's clearly amazing. Let's put this into context. You didn't do everything right in your whole life, but you have a good life. And you can go back to it after this and you can be a good person. You can lighten up a little bit and you can be kinder. And do I get all of that right? No, I'm sure I don't, but it definitely helped me, I think.
A little earlier, James said something I found strikingly poetic. Do you remember how he observed that on the small island they were policing the silence of a very quiet place? Once the ducks come into view, returning to the island to nest after a very long absence, silence becomes critical.
You have to basically be absolutely silent and move very slowly because these ducks are plucking up courage to come in from the open ocean. They have to be brave enough to come ashore to a place that's really dangerous for them. They're seabirds, really. They don't want to come ashore, but they have to. And then they're dragged so that they can disappear into the foreshore where the seaweed is. I have to say, I didn't know when I went to this island whether it was the work or the feathers or the beautiful seascape that gave Anna her reward. And actually, it was all about the ducks. She was obsessed with the ducks, helping the ducks, loving the ducks. Somebody else who'd been to that island said she thinks like a duck. And she laughed at that and took it as a compliment because she really did have to think like a duck. If I'm a mother duck and I'm coming ashore, where will I want to nest? I'll build the nest there. What would I be scared of? Oh, I'd be scared of the sails of a sailing boat, or a fisherman making too much noise, or a dog coming ashore from a fishing boat. I have to stop that thing happening before it scares the ducks. So she's really, really identifying with the ducks to an extent that I've never met anybody who identifies with an animal more. All of the joy, all of the magic for her was about these ducks. I don't think she thought the male ducks were more spectacular. They were certainly more eye-catching to a stranger, but I think she thought the magic was these incredibly brave, humble, almost self-sacrificing female ducks that did this incredibly brave thing.
I'm not sure just how to imagine this scene here. The female ducks sounds to me like they're unduly, well, maybe I shouldn't say it that way. They're straight out cautious, maybe not unduly cautious.
They creep ashore in the twilight hours or through the darkness at night. They find a nest that they like and they lay one egg, and then they go back to the sea. And they keep doing that night after night until they've laid 6, 8, 10 eggs. And then they come and sit on them and they start incubating them. When Anna sensed that the ducks, which had been hanging around on the foreshores looking a little nervous, she would whisper to me, "They're coming ashore, they're coming, they're coming." So she would be in her pajamas at like 11 o'clock at night, like a kid peering through the window for Father Christmas to come. It isn't one of the most spectacular visual phenomena in the animal kingdom. What it was is basically a little brown duck winding its way very, very nervously through the clumps of water marigolds and the rushes and things. And the best thing is actually not the sight of them creeping their way ashore, but the noise. So you have the male eider ducks out on the water encouraging them.
The way you describe it, the ducks coming ashore back to their nests, and Anna is whispering, almost like she was keeping a hushed vigil of observation. And that's really saying something.
It's said that it wasn't over. These were probably ducks that were born on her island 4 or 5 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. They were coming back because of her. It meant that her stewardship was working. She was just so excited, just the joy on her face, because the world's okay. If these ducks keep coming, the world's okay. Things are going to go on. We've looked after it okay. And when the ducks weren't coming, I also noticed there was a kind of fear, which maybe everybody recognizes, right? We wait for the swallows to come back. We wait for the snow geese to come back, whatever it would be, wherever you live. What happens if they don't come back? Because we ruined it. Like, we just broke the whole thing. And that was in the air as well until they came. So when they came, there was just a happiness came with those ducks.
There's more than just eider ducks on this rocky slab called Fier to feed our constant wonder. In just a moment, you'll hear what I mean. James Rebanks is about to relate how Anna did not think it was only animals and a small handful of human guardians on that island. Yes, the night does conceal some mystery when the ducks slip secretively back from the sea to their nests, but there are, to Anna's way of thinking, other shadowy presences to watch for, and goings-on that border on the fantastical. James Rebanks is author of The Place of Tides, and this is the Constant Wonder Podcast. I've got another podcast to recommend to you from the BYU Radio family of podcasts. It's called The Appleseed. Each episode features master storytellers sharing all kinds of stories for you and your family, folk tales, fairy tales, personal and family tales. It's ideal for road trips, bedtime, or any time you're looking for something that the whole family can enjoy together. And here's a great side effect of listening to The Appleseed. It has a nearly magical ability to conjure up a whole lot of healthy storytelling right at home, and it often prompts the sharing of precious memories as well. Be sure to catch The Appleseed wherever you get your podcasts. We now return to Constant Wonder. This is so remote, such a small little place, where somebody is deprived of all the stimuli of a big city or even a middle-sized city. You're just 3 people on an island. A person might start seeing or hearing the spirits, the trolls, the elves, the huldefolk. I don't want to make light of that at all. I'm not going to say I'm a believer in the hulder, or however you say it in Norwegian, but you were introduced to this by Anna, and there's something big going on there.
I'm sort of super English, super not very religious, super secular, slightly skeptical about things. And suddenly I'm in this place where, and I'm sitting in the room, and there's a really sunny evening where the sun was coming over the back of the rocks, right through the window and filling this whole room with like a golden light. And then Anna started to tell me that it was a night like that when she'd first seen the hulder. I said, "What's the hulder?" She said, "The female troll." A smirk almost appeared on my face, a little, like we're not used to thinking about hearing that kind of thing. And I stopped myself smirking, and I thought, okay, that's your job here is not to smirk, James. What does she believe? What has she seen? Turns out that on those islands and in those coastal places, and actually throughout rural Norway, perhaps most people historically believed in shadow races of people, sort of mythical races of people. And on those islands, there's a very strong culture, certainly in the past and still held by some of the older members, that there are effectively people living in the rocks. So the Huldra are like a shadow race of people. Lots of the men and some of the women think that they mean harm to people, but Anna didn't see it that way. She thought that the Huldra on her island had protected her. So bear in mind, this is a woman who, when she first went to the island, went on her own, is in a place where there's male fishermen coming and going all the time. I imagine that can be quite intimidating. But she felt like she had this sort of guardian spirit, which is this woman that lives in the rocks, a giant woman. And she'd seen her one sunset. And she described her as having a face like on a ship's prow in the old days, those wooden carved faces with the big, elegant faces. She said, "I saw someone like that." And I didn't know what to make of this, just like you don't know what to make of it. Like, what do you say when people believe something that to you seems a little strange? And what I realized over time is it had helped Anna to believe in this. She'd felt safer in this place when there was this shadow female figure that had protected her. She liked that men were scared to come to the island because they didn't want to have tricks played on them by the Huldra. The myths are that the Huldra ties knots in your fishing line or your fishing nets or trips you up. Or there'd been a man on that island in the past who had a scar on his face because when he was young, he'd been seduced and taken to the rocks. The woman was going to take him into the rocks as like a lover or something. And he'd come to his senses at the last moment and fought his way free, but had been pulled into the rock and cut his face. And also when we went into this little barn on the top of the hill, in many places in Norway, you leave a free stall. Let's say there's 5 stalls for your cows. You leave one free because at night the Huldra bring their cows, which are blue, apparently. They bring their cow in there to milk the cow. So it would be quite easy to sort of laugh at this or to think we're superior to this. But I didn't find myself thinking that when I was with her, actually. I thought, if you believe it, that's okay with me. And the more I got to know Anna was that she felt like she was a short-term protector of this place. And maybe the Huldra is like the longer-term protector, will be there after we're all gone. What was interesting was when I met Anna's family later on, and I said about the Huldra, one of her daughters, who's absolutely lovely and very modern and very intelligent, said, "We don't believe in those." And her mum from the other room said, "I do." Norway's just like everywhere else, right? They're full of people grappling with bits of the past they want to hold on to, modern rationalist thought. And the two don't always match perfectly. They're sort of rumbling alongside each other. And I certainly didn't see anybody, but one of the first springs when Anna went out to be on that island, there was a giant storm that swept away all of her nest boxes that she makes out of wood. And in the morning when she went out, they'd all been sort of put back on top of the rocks safely across the water. So she rowed across and got them all. And she thought possibly the Huldra had pulled them out and put them on the rocks for her so that she could see them and collect them. And that's maybe the kind of thing that many, many Europeans, my ancestors, your ancestors, believed things like that in the past. And for the purposes of this adventure, I just parked judgment. I said, you know what? If that's the culture of this place and that's what you believe, that's the story I'll tell.
Is there a part of you that is willing to say that you have respect for that worldview?
I think I would have said no before I went. But the weeks that I spent there, the spring that I spent there, changed my view. And yeah, I 100% respect anybody's beliefs like that. And more than that, I can just see how it's useful. And maybe that's me getting older. So I think I feel the same way about my religious friends. I'm like, okay, if that's useful to you, that helps you to live a good life, that helps you to rationalize this crazy swirling life that we're all in, if that helps you to be kind, if that helps you to get through the tough moments in your life, like, what boat did I get off to think I know more than everybody else, right? I'm not that clever. I'm not that wise. I must be getting old because I'm becoming more forgiving. I don't mind what you believe. I don't mind what I hope respectful is the word. I'm interested and respectful now.
James Rebanks' wife was pretty sure that the trip to Norway would do him some good. So I had to ask him if assisting Anna with the guardianship of those ducks and building those nests brought him anything valuable for the work he does back on his own farm in England. It was lambing season for him as we had our conversation.
So that's a good question. So right outside the farmhouse as I speak to you now, we're lambing our sheep and we're calving our cattle. I always have a busy life, but I take a month off, I say off, to do the lambing and the calving. And it is very similar to being on that island. Maybe I found a home from home when I went there because you're focused in a way that you're not in most of modern life, entirely on life and death, on the sun coming up and the sun going down, on what the wind's doing, on whether this thing in front of you will live or die and whether you can make a difference to it. Perhaps that's what it's like to be a doctor in a busy hospital or something, that sense of adrenaline that you have to be utterly tuned into what you're doing. But in both Anna's case and mine, when I'm at home on the farm, it's about a closeness to nature where you as an individual almost don't matter. You have a role to play in this wider drama. And the nearest thing I find at home to her island is right now. When I go back out to those fields in a minute, I'll be utterly lost in that. And I've had non-farming friends come to visit me and shadow me for like a week when I've been doing the lambing. And one of them, he was here for a week, a Polish friend of mine, who isn't a farmer. And the morning after, he got on a train, went to the airport, and he sent me this message from the airport, which I often think of. He said, I don't know what my life is about right now because I was so absorbed in that thing that you do alongside you. And I'm now totally confused what I'm focused on the rest of the time. What is it I'm doing? Because it felt like it was everything. Now, I'm not saying that lambing sheep or calving or looking after ducks are the only things that matter. We all have to get on with the lives we have. But there is something quite elational or ecstatic or euphoric about spring, I think, when you're fully acting in it.
James worked with Anna for 10 weeks in 2019. As James and I had our conversation, she was 77 years old. In anticipation of his potential visit there, before he even arrived, she had expressed to James, as you may recall, that she didn't think she had many seasons of work left on that little island. At least that was her thinking 6 years ago.
I'm still in touch with the family. Anna is more retired than she was. I think this might be the first season that she doesn't go out at all. So she's living back on the bigger island of Vega, surrounded by her family and her friends, and I think leading a really good life, and is very loved, very respected. She might be surprised to hear this, but I hope she hears it. She's sort of venerated and respected in her community now. No one would say, oh, Anna, she's just the cook at the old people's home. She's Anna that helped to keep alive their culture, that fought for it when no one else did, that dug in when no one else did, or only a handful of other people did. For somebody very quiet and very modest, she's very respected in her community and very loved. And I just tried to capture a slice of that.
James Rebanks is author of The Place of Tides. If you'd like to hear a previous conversation I had with James, just search our archives for the episode of Constant Wonder titled A Farmer's Journey. This episode was produced by Tenery Taylor with help from Lily Jensen. Sound design by Gracie Davis. I'm Marcus Smith. Constant Wonder is a production of BYU Radio.